Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today we are discussing a very popular series. I would say one of those Twitter darling books that have been recommended to us countless times and gets lots of love and lots of praise, and rightfully so, of course, and we just had to make an episode about it.
We did, Charles. I've noticed every time that Jade City starts coming up on Twitter, you start getting a bunch of very excited fans of this series demanding that you read it, demanding that you read the whole series as well. That's a big one. Once you get involved in the Green Bone Saga, they're like, you gotta go all the way with this. So we're a third of the way through that series, having just read Fonda Lee's first book in the series, Jade City. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we're really excited to join all you folks on Twitter in espousing the wonderful writing of Fonda Lee and this fantastic book.
That's right. We are here to discuss Jade City, book one of the Green Bone Saga. Came out in 2017, relatively modern, one of the more modern books that we've read and discussed on the show. Won the World Fantasy Award in 2018, and it's got two other books. Jade Legacy came out just last year, so this is a very modern, fresh take on this modern fantasy genre. Lots of crime syndicate, organized crime, violence, and yeah, I'm really excited to get into the meat of it. But before we get too much further, I think we gotta throw out our spoiler warning, right?
Yeah, Charles and I are gonna have a no-holds-barred conversation when it comes to Jade City by Fonda Lee. So if you haven't yet read this book, now's a good time to get started with that, but it's also a good time to turn this down in your headphones because you don't want to get this awesome book spoiled for you.
No, you don't, and there's a lot of great stuff in here, so I highly recommend you go, you read it, you check it out, and then you come back and give this a listen, because we've got a lot to say about Jade City, so let's get right into it. Jade City, quite a departure from some of the fantasy novels we've been reading recently in terms of its setting. We got a much more modern setting. There's cars and planes and televisions, and it's kind of like a post World War II hustle and bustle of the city setting for a fantasy world, and I found that rather refreshing.
I did too, although every time I read a series in fantasy that has one of these more urban fantasy, more modern settings in it, it is slightly jarring for me, and I just until I get maybe a quarter of the way in or so, I keep being like, oh wait, yeah, there's phones. Things like that, because it's a totally different time period than we're used to, and I think it works extremely well in this book. I'm really happy to read a book like this because, like you said, it is a breath of fresh air to get to read something that's in this time period. So it was cool, and I think Fonda Lee handles it extremely well. It doesn't focus on any of the technology so much as it focuses on the stuff that we love in fantasy, which is the magic and the magic system that she creates centered around the concept of Jade.
Right, exactly. And I even think Fonda Lee, our author here, has gone on the record as saying she explicitly wanted to write an epic fantasy in a more non-traditional setting. So I think that was very successfully achieved here. What she pulls on is a lot of really interesting, I'm going to say, like, tropes or like plot points, key elements from a lot of organized crime stories and organized crime classic tropes and plot elements, and she brings those into her fantasy story, and she weaves in this magic system that kind of enriches the whole thing and tells this whole unique story very appropriate for a fantasy world. So it's like, okay, like The Godfather in a fantasy magic system kind of setting, like sign me up for that. I'm ready. That, like, sold me on the premise alone.
For sure. An easy book to pitch to folks, and one that you'll feel confident will deliver. And I think a lot of folks who aren't big fantasy readers, they don't realize that this kind of stuff is being written out there. They think of fantasy and it still brings up the idea, well, pretty much like what's going on
Swords
in
and
Rings
sorcery.
of Power, right? Like, so yeah, things like
House
that.
of the Dragon.
Everything's got elves and dwarves, or even House of the Dragon, which is less high fantasy than what I'm conjuring up.
But it's still like dragons
what people might
and
think
castles
of in the Lord of the Rings
and
world, but
allegiances
and medieval and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a book that I think could be a really great gateway fantasy book for folks, if you know especially if you know they're into some of these crime syndicate type stories, and you're like, oh, you like The Godfather, give this book a read. So I'm always happy when we get one of those books that you feel confident will be a great entry point into fantasy for people, because we're always trying to get more people into reading fantasy, and this one has a lot to offer in showing the breadth of what fantasy can cover, and how much exciting, innovative stuff is out there.
Well said. It's also a great example of how you can use genre bending to tell an exciting new story. Take, for example, like a lot of people say it's Godfather-esque. A lot of reviews very commonly pull in The Godfather. I don't think you can't talk about the story of Jade City and not make parallels to The Godfather. You have like the way the crime family is set up, where you have kind of like your right hand man and your soldier, like the underboss and the consigliere of The Godfather, and then you have soldiers and capos, like fingers and fists. So it's like really interesting elements, not just of how the crime is structured, but also the family relationships. You've got like the hot-headed, quick to violence one. You've got the one who's more mild-mannered, trying to stay out of the family and being pulled in. Like all of these common tropes being pulled in, but the way that Fonda Lee takes almost like these ingredients and makes her own recipe and makes her own final dish is really fascinating. And I feel like a lot of stories, especially in fantasy, can get heavily criticized for being derivative. Like, how many Tolkien clones have we heard of in the past? And it's so easy to write a story that's just kind of a retooling of a more classic fantasy story. And I feel like this genre, more so than other areas of fiction, are plagued with that. And it's kind of easy to say, oh, it's a Godfather ripoff, but it's really not, because we're taking the same ingredients, but we're making a totally different dish. And that's, to me, one of the most impressive things about Fonda Lee's story here with the Green Bone Saga. It's like, wow, by taking these elements and working them into this world that you so lovingly, painstakingly built, in this magic system and the economy that exists and the political factions that exist that you've made totally from the ground up, and then work these mob story elements into it. It breathes new life into it, and it's very exciting. And I think one of the highest praises I had is it made me want to watch The Godfather. It got me into this whole like organized crime kick. I was like, oh, I want to read this story and that story. And I did watch The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2.
You did?
I did, yeah. I watched them after reading this because I was just so in the mood. And they're very different stories, obviously. They hit similar beats, more like, almost like, it's organized crime. You're gonna have certain beats that are hit. It's kind of what makes them fun. So she hits those, but she changes which character's which and how that affects the relationship of the family, because her characters are wholly original and the situations that she brings them in are really strong. And the magic system obviously is something that does not exist in other organized crime stories that I've watched or read. So and I think we're going to have a lot to say about that magic system. But before I get to that, I'll just finish my thought of, really great use of these organized crime ingredients here. And she completely avoided that pitfall of just, oh, what if The Godfather had magic? It's like, no, this is a totally different story. And thank goodness for that. And I think it speaks to Fonda Lee's keen perception of, like, what story beats do I want to hit to, like, fall into the genre, and how do I break away and tell my own story. And it's really well balanced here.
Well said, Charles. And all this talk of ingredients and dishes. It's relatively early Saturday morning over here. Haven't really had a real breakfast, so it is getting me hungry. But
I was hungry for more Godfather stories. Oh, you're going to admit this right now?
Godfather stories, especially. Yeah, I'm going to admit this right now.
Oh, boy.
I'm not going to dance around this, okay? I am no coward. I haven't watched The Godfather.
I think today that's
and
okay.
I'm coming to you, yeah. I'm coming to you with this, Charles. You know this about me already, but I'm also trusting all of our listeners with this, and I'm sure no one will tweet at the FTF account, "You haven't watched The Godfather," dude? Like 3 exclamation points and all that.
You're just lucky you successfully. You're lucky you successfully fled Long Island before you admitted that. I think that's the biggest thing. In Colorado, no one's going to care. You're safe. So,
People
for me, it's
care.
like coming from the Northeast and having a family that has a lot of Italian American roots to it. It's like a second Bible, basically. It's a religious text, the book of The Godfather, and also the movies. So I've seen them, I've read the book. I think they're great stories, they're classics, and I think it would be interesting for you now to watch it, especially after having read Jade City, of like, oh, interesting how we played with these moments in the story and with these character roles. And but I don't think it in any way, it's not like a love letter to The Godfather or anything. You're not missing anything from this experience by not watching The Godfather. For me, it's just like it made me want to watch it because it just got me excited about the genre and wanting more, so, which is a good thing. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, oh, you get so much more out of the Green Bone Saga by having watched The Godfather. Not true. It's just if you like one, you like the other. So I don't think I don't think you're gonna leave too much on the table, like discussion wise, having not seen it. I think we can forgive you for that.
That's good. I mean, well handled, Charles. I don't feel like less of a human by nature.
I mean, you should.
You
should watch
The
it.
Godfather. I will. I actually wanted to before this discussion.
It's just long. It's a long movie.
Just it's so long. That's really why I haven't watched it, because I mean, people think this is ironic because I read these doorstopper books, but I actually
these like 40-hour audiobooks
with those two. And I mean, it's for some reason when it comes to movies and stuff, I'm like, give me a tight like hour 40 minutes and let's call it. And when I start seeing movies that are like 3 hours long, I'm like, I don't think I can do this, but I will do it. I actually meant to watch The Godfather before this episode, so I didn't embarrass myself in the discussion. But here we are, and, life gets in the way sometimes, Charles, but it can only get in the way for so long, because I am going to watch The Godfather.
Well, we are looking forward to that day, but I think one of the striking differences from The Godfather is that we have a whole magic system. The Godfather has none of that. Exactly. And to me, this is part of what makes the book really shine. Obviously, Fonda Lee's good sense
Shine.
of shine.
Nailed it.
Thank you. Yes. One.
You also said that she has keen perception, which is one of the disciplines in you said that a while
I
back.
sure
I was
did.
like, I'll let him do his
I'm
thing.
glad
I'm
you're
not gonna-
catching up on these. This is the kind of quality content that you can expect from the French Talking Fantasy podcast. So be sure to drop 5 stars. On
Mostly
Shopify,
Charles Assaf.
or Shopify,
Did you say
Spotify.
4 stars?
5 stars.
Did you say?
I mean,
You gotta
5.
play that back. I thought I heard 4.
Maybe.
Don't get 4.
I meant to rate 5 stars on Spotify.
Actually, you can give us 4 stars on Shopify if you want. We don't mind. But anyway, Charles, I de-segged your seg. So
As you said, it's early
talk.
morning.
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah,
I'm still going through my coffee here.
Yeah. I've been more of a 2 coffee guy lately, and I'm only 1 in, so sorry for not
your
being
tolerance is
on
going
point as
down,
much
just
as
like
usual.
shine. You just need more and more and more.
Exactly. Yeah, and let's get into this magic system, Charles.
Bring
I
us in.
don't have a fun seg in the way that you do, but it's essentially a drug. I would say, because it has these sort of withdrawal effects that come into play, and it can cause side effects that are actually dangerous. It has tolerance as well. But the cool thing about taking Jade is you basically can get these superhuman powers from it. And it also... so there's those disciplines I mentioned. They're trained in it in an academy setting where it's strength, steel, perception, lightness, deflection, and channeling. And everyone's kind of got their own skill set and what they're good at, what they're not as good at. And the extent to which you have Jade is it becomes a status symbol as well in this society. It means so much to have a lot of Jade. And so it's got this physiological element of having more Jade. It's like you're addicted to it. And then this sociological element, which is, hey, I've got to look big. Let's say, I'm one of the pillars, right? You have to have a lot of Jade and show you can handle a lot of Jade. And that obviously plays a big role in the plot.
With Lon,
with Lon, and it's a really interesting magic system. I think I would call it a hard magic system.
Yeah, I would
make that differentiation between the soft magic systems, where this Brandon Sanderson magic system way of thinking, but it's become hugely popular in the genre overall to talk about this way. Soft magic systems being where you don't really know a lot about how the magic works, very mysterious. In this, we have the disciplines, they're being taught how to use it, and it's explained really well.
Right. It's not as hard as something like metallurgy, where like it's super in Mistborn, but and that's almost kind of what I like about it. It's like you grab Jade and it makes you superhuman in a lot of ways, but the extent to like how far you can exert yourself and how much you can do, there's a lot of like muddy variables, and like how pure is your, like, are you the right bloodline, how good is your natural ability working with Jade, like, how much have you used recently, all these kind of things make it really interesting and nebulous and add to kind of the drama of the story. So it's kind of soft in those respects, but I would agree with you that it is quite a hard magic system. And you're making me think of Sanderson's Laws of Magic, and the second one where it's like, okay, the magic system's like weaknesses are almost, or limitations are almost as interesting as its strengths. And
more interesting than its strengths, I believe Sanderson would say.
Right, and that is very true here. The first thing I like about it is that it's a resource, right? It's fuel that you have to mine, and it becomes an integral part of the economy of this between these two clans and within the whole government that they're working with. It's like, okay, we control the production of shine and we're the only ones that can really use it, and there's other governments that want to be able to use it but don't have the right bloodline, and all of these things to make it super interesting, and how the controlling of that affects the economy and affects the socioeconomic relationships between the clans and the government is super interesting. And then, you have the fact that, like you said, these kind of drawbacks to it, the withdrawal symptoms of it as well. So you have those really interesting limitations on this, and it fuels a lot of the characters' like struggles and concerns. Like, as much as this is their source of like political power and physical power, obviously, it's also killing them. Like, Lon died from taking too much shine because he needed to like wear more jade than he could handle. And then, you have all these characters living and dying, and you have the itches, right, which is when withdrawal is so strong you just crave it too much that you like kill yourself, and there's no cure for it. Once you show signs of it, it's a death sentence, and that weighs on some characters as well. Like, one of my favorite characters, Andy, Andon, has that weighing over him.
Andy, is that what the cool kids
Hilo
call?
calls him Andy. So I just called him Andy, but it sways over him constantly, and then we'll get more into his character as we go through the discussion. But those limitations are super fascinating and super strong, and what makes this book wholly original to me is the whole socioeconomic intricacies between the clans, the governments, and the relationships within the families. And how what is essentially like, what if like this heroin like superpower, like it's heroin but it also gives you superpowers, it's like this weird combination sometimes, and it's super fascinating, and it fuels the whole story. It's really imaginative and exciting. So great use by Fonda Lee of the magic system here.
Great use indeed, Charles. And to close out those Sanderson laws, the last one is expand on what you have already before you add something new. This idea that going into depth with your magic system with maybe just one kind of magic and seeing the ramifications of how it affects people and society at all these different levels is more important than the breadth of having a bunch of different magic systems or something going on at once. And I think that it's another place where Fonda Lee demonstrates her mastery of magic system writing here, where Jade, you went through it there, Charles. It has, we said, physiological effect, psychological effect, sociological effect, economic or socioeconomic effect, right? It's just, it pervades every part of this society, from the way that they speak down to, or up to, like, the way that wars end up getting waged. And,
Exactly.
It's phenomenal, and it's a delicious feast for any fantasy. I'm just starving.
Keep this going.
For any fantasy readers who love a great magic system. It's one I would be very quick to recommend for folks who are fans of Sanderson's work, like Mistborn, even though it's totally different setting, totally different story, but it's that magic system that makes this in part so easy to recommend to folks.
Agreed. And it's like, it's plotting. It's just a fun read too. That's such an important thing for me these days after reading tons of fantasy. It's like, sometimes when you're building your big epic world, you forget to make more fun moments throughout, and this story remains fun and interesting throughout. So, and her plotting, I'd say, is way up there in terms of her strengths and the strengths of this book too. It's like the magic system, the plotting, and even the world building, not just the world itself, but the characters and their relationships, which when you're writing like an organized crime story is so crucial to get right. And it's easy to just rely on archetypes like, oh, Hilo's just the angry, violent guy, and he just wants to go out and beat people up, and you always have to hold him back, but then he gets loose and he starts fighting the enemy, and now you're in a war. It's like so easy to do, but a character like Hilo, he's so sensitive and he has such a good perception of people. It really brings this interesting element to his character, and then he gets thrown into the spotlight of being Pillar. I'm getting ahead of myself, but to say that like all of these complex interpersonal relationships are so strong in this book.
Yeah, the idea that family and duty play such a large role here,
Mm-hmm.
and even the idea of a character like Shay just leaving, just moving somewhere else, was such an insult to everyone around her, and changes the way everyone sees her, and those kind of parts. They're like conflict makers, which are exactly what you want in a I think in writing in general, in the same way that the limitations or weaknesses of a magic system are more interesting than strengths. The conflicts between characters and the just the ways in which problems are created in a story are much more interesting a lot of times than people resolving things all the time or things being positive in a book. So it's exciting to see all these characters grapple with that. I think, you mentioned, and we'll get into the plot details more, but you mentioned Hilo having to take over a role in which he is ill-equipped, given his personality, and having to try to evolve into that role. I think it shows, I think that Fonda Lee, she knows how to create conflict or move people into uncomfortable situations in a way that shows that complexity of character that you were bringing out, right? If Hilo was just the horn the entire time, a role where he fit that role like a glove, and or that role fit him like a glove, and if he just stays in that role the whole time, then he doesn't have to show all of the sides of his personality, but he then has to take on this leadership role as the pillar, which is much more demanding of, I guess, multiplicity in one's behavior and personality. You can't just be this, warmonger. And Hilo's my favorite character in this
He's
book,
up there.
and it's for me because he shows all of that, I guess, depth and personality, and all these different sides of him once he takes over the pillar role. Before that, he was not. Actually, before that, Lon was probably my favorite. Rest in peace.
R.I.P. Lon.
Hilo. Yeah, Lon was a good, I think, a good fit for the pillar role because he was able to keep the peace. He has this more, I guess, I don't know if mild-mannered is the right way to put it, but just when you compare people to Hilo, everyone's mild-mannered. He's got this, I guess it's like greater stoicism and this level-headedness that made him a perfect fit for that role. And it's also, I mean, I won't bring up spoilers from House of the Dragon, but there's actually a similar.
I've compared
like?
Lon to certain characters in House of the Dragon too. I'm like, it's kind of an interesting archetype of like the imperfect leader. It's like, is this person doing the right thing? Is he right for the job sometimes? And a certain.
I think Lon was better equipped than the character.
Lon is definitely more qualified, but still has these key flaws to him that I find super interesting. And he even tries to combat those flaws, and it's in combating those flaws that ends up killing him almost, essentially. It really interesting. I would have to say I agree with you in a lot of respects. My favorite character is still Andon. I just love the ending of this book. I think the scene with Andon and Hilo at the end is the best scene in the book. So that's kind of like he kind of shines for me, but Hilo's such a complex character, and he shines, and it's I love his.
Oh, really? It's Lon that shines. That was the problem.
Is a star that shined way too bright.
Yes.
And until it burned out, unfortunately. But yeah, Hilo's great for his complexity. He is very sensitive, and he does love people, and he understands this what makes human connection intimate. He's very in tune with that more than any other character in this story. He knows how to lead people and hold people accountable as a way to kind of lift them up. But he can't quite seem to do that for Andon, which we'll get to that in a moment. I think we need to just start getting into some plot points here, otherwise we're going to be all over the place in terms of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
One of these like book end characters that super fascinates me, this story, is Barrow the thief, where he's here at the beginning and he's kind of in the middle with Lon, and he's at the end with Lon too. It's just like, here's a guy who's done nothing but mess up and do things wrong, but because he's so bold in doing it, he shakes things up more than anyone realizes, including himself. It's just like the things that he's done throughout this. He's like the inciting incident in which Hilo wants to go to war with the Mountain Clan, right? He's like, oh yeah, there's been like this weird territory disputes, and Hilo wants to go out and fight, and Lon's kind of being the peacekeeper in the beginning here.
Yeah, I like the idea of Barrow and the way that Barrow is written by Fonda Lee. I hate Barrow as a person. He's so, just his like way of thinking about himself is so annoying.
But I love that Fonda Lee commits to that, though. It's very Abercrombie-esque.
Oh, it's great character writing.
Yeah, where you commit to that.
Well, it's great you bring him up, because I was just thinking about how much I like these ideas of history turning on just these weird moments, and even just these people who seem inconsequential can change the world. And there's that story about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That's throwback to our high school history days, U.S. history.
Yeah.
But,
is he inferred?
Or actually, the U.S. history. Well, the Euro history, really. Although, U.S. got involved. But point being, shout out to Miss Halloran.
Shout out to our
AP Euro history. That was
teacher. For her patience putting up with us.
Yeah, that was a great class. Yeah, I might have gotten kicked out that class.
You're only kicked out like
times,
once or twice, yeah. For being a class clown.
Yeah. And she was always very kind about it. She was like, Dylan, I feel like today is not going to be a good day for you in this class. Maybe.
She understood and still loved you for it.
Oh, yeah. Miss Halloran and I had a great relationship. She was like...
She wrote one of my letters of recommendation.
I didn't end up needing... She was going to write one of mine, but I didn't end up needing them for... but
sports
anyway.
Reasons.
What's that?
Sports reasons, right?
Sports reasons, yes. But enough about Miss Halloran.
The old days.
She was like my favorite teacher. But what was I talking about? Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. She'd be so proud. But what ended up happening is, I think the people who were going to assassinate him, I'm going to double check this next time you're talking, Charles, and get it right if I got anything wrong. But people who were supposed to assassinate him, they missed their actual chance, and then they're like pissed off, like, we screwed this up, and they go to get burgers or something, and then like right outside where they go to eat, Franz Ferdinand's car broke down. And so just right in front of her, just sitting there. And then they're like, oh, wow, like, we still got a shot at this. And then they assassinate him. So, and these are very minor people. I don't know their names, but, not people in position of power you'd expect history to turn on. And it's just this weird coincidence that changes everything. Mm-hmm. And that's what this moment reminds me of in Jade City, where Barrow and I can't remember the name of the other character that was there during that moment, but
Sampa,
they're just showing up. They're supposed to they're showing up to just shoot up this place, and it wasn't even designed to be in any way an assassination of Lan. They were, they would never expect these two punk kids to be able to actually assassinate Lan. And just between, they see him leaving, They're like, oh, wow, that's him. They mistake what their goal is supposed to be here and they follow him. And just by chance, it's like the worst time for him where he's all like hopped up on too much Jade because he's got to make this big show about how powerful he is and how he can handle it. And on top of that, he's using this shine to try to like use even more, and he's just all messed up.
Mm.
And they just catch him at the right time or the wrong time, depending on your perspective. And this tiny little dude, Barrow's got should play no large role in history, ends up like turning history on its head. I would say. I mean, assuming especially this is like this one city really, but I assume, especially looking at the titles of the following books, like Jade War, Jade Legacy, I assume that moment is going to change the history of this world. So
For sure.
it's a
And
real
what's interesting
assassination of
about it is
Archduke
how
moment.
like all the wrong reasons Barrow was even in that moment in the first place, because he was this mysterious, green bone from the Mountain Clan gave him this huge submachine gun and was like, just go and shoot up the nightclub that he frequents. Just shoot it up and drive away. Right, that was the instruction. And then Barrow's like, oh, I'll win him over by going in a step further and taking the initiative and attacking Lon directly. And it's like, the fact that you would even think that that's what this Greenbone wanted means you're super clueless. The fact that you think you can go and approach one of the most powerful Greenbones there is, Lon, and somehow survive is another one. And then the fact that Lon actually just like gets a heart attack from a shine overdose and dies while you're there. It's like, it's this combination of luck and ignorance, and this blatant misinterpretation of, I guess it's iShow, but really just like this blatant misinterpretation of how mob mentality works. It's like, you don't just go and whack the pillar of the rival clan, dude. You just go and you shoot up his favorite place and you drive off. Like, that's all you needed to do. Like, what did you think we're gonna let you in now that you did this? So really fascinating, like, misuse of honor and reputation and pride that gets Barrow cast out and gets Lon killed. So yeah, really, really interesting, well built up, well constructed plot point there, right in the middle of the book, or about 3/4 of the way into the book, right? That was such a great payoff for what happens with Lon and this whole brewing rivalry between the two clans, and the fact that just it was so contentious that one little adjectation from Barrow kicked off a whole stream of bad things. And then, of course, you have right after that, you have Hilo, and then you have Shay just attacking mountain territory. You're like, oh, snap. Like, because that's the other thing, too. If they realized it was an accident that not related to the Mountain Clan, maybe they would have shown some restraint. But they didn't. They immediately went and killed a bunch of soldiers from the Mountain Clan. And then at that point, there's no turning back, no matter what the reason was. So, and you have to keep the real reason buried.
And the irony,
kind of, like,
buried. Yeah. The irony of Lan sparing Barrow at the start of the book too, and then it coming back to bite him, right? Lan even in that moment recognizes, like, is this a kid that tried to steal from us way before? Are you kidding me? It's like, I spared you. You should be so glad. Like, I should have killed you. And of course, the no good deed goes unpunished for Lan here, and he ends up going down for trying to be a nice dude, which also felt very Abercrombian.
Right. There's a few times here where mercy is met with ill rebuke, right? Because you have Shay, who was begging to spare the weatherman. I forget his name, but
it's
Doru. Yeah, so you have Doru, right, who they exposed as either being incompetent or on the take, one of the two, with the Mountain Clan. And Hilo's like, well, he has to die straight up. And then Shay's like, no, he can, like, play checkers with grandfather. And they're like, well, just take his Jade away and they can play checkers.
Yeah, I know about that move.
And I was like, really?
When
like,
they were making that move, I was like, ugh.
play checkers with the guy that everyone hates that's half senile anyway? Like, yeah, I would have killed him for sure. But, you know, it's your grandfather. You want him to have someone to be with. It was a very interesting twist that the grandfather gave up some of his Jade, something they would have never expected him to do. Like the ultimate disrespect to his kids of like, you guys are weak. I hate you all. And like, you know, the grandfather still had a little bit in him too. It's like you almost kind of respect him in a way of like, they think they can just send me a playmate and I'd be docile and all of this. Like I still got it, you know. It's such a fun moment. Like, so in the
that was a good moment.
Call Sen's character is so great where he continues to just disrespect and hate his grandkids.
Yeah, the only one he liked is Lon, and even Lon, he was like trying to beat the crap out of him.
He
early in
refused
the
to change
book,
Duru as the weatherman. Like he refused Lon's, like, you know, executive decisions. Wouldn't let him make any of those big decisions.
Yeah,
it's a lot of nasty things to him.
It was a good moment. I was surprised by him giving the Jade because Fonda Lee builds Jade so well as a thing that you would never think to give away, and someone as proud as Call Sen, but that's what made it the perfect
he hates
way
his grandkids
to
that much.
have this guy. Yeah. Just didn't think he'd have that much hatred for his grandkids.
He hates them so much that he'd give away his own Jade. It's brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, just to screw them over.
And when he's old and kind of powerless too, like it's his moment of feeling powerful again too, which is great. Well, again, another just well-constructed moment built on all of the tension between the family and what we know about Jade. It's like the payoffs in some of these plot moments are so good and so juicy, and that's just one of the more subtle ones even.
Yeah, I mean, Shay, that's a critical mistake, I think, from Shay. And I get that he's supposed to be this sort of uncle figure to them, but there's a time where you need to be kind of ruthless, I think, and Hilo was the man for that job. It was not something that he was looking forward to, but he was planning on eventually getting around to killing Duru. And that guy, I mean, from the first moment we're exposed to him, I was like, this guy's bad news. This guy is 100% betraying you, and you got to get this guy out of here as soon as possible. And they did not, and I think that's another one that's going to have some serious ramifications.
Shay's made some questionable decisions for me. Like, she's in that role of, like, look, she felt defined by her family, being part of, like, one of the two most known families in this country. And she wants to make an identity for herself. We're familiar with that trope. And then the family kind of pulls her back in. But during all of that, she's like, oh, you know, I'm still trying to make my way. I'm proud of my independence, this and that. And then, which I kind of liked. It was interesting. Like, and then there's a case of, like, how much can you earn any of your own independence when you're so ingrained in this family? And then ultimately, her getting pulled back in was almost like an inevitability in a lot of ways. But she was always kind of half in, half out. She's been on the edge a bunch of times, and it wasn't until she kind of faces off with the Mountain Clan, what's her face, Ait Mata, that she kind of is a little bit more affirmed in decision. But she's been waffling this whole book, and she made the questionable decision to attack Mountain Territory. I mean, she thought Lon was assassinated, so you kind of give her a pass there. But she went from, oh, I'm going to be an individual, to I'm killing Mountain Clan soldiers off the inciting incident of Lon's death, which is a powerful motivator. But to go from not in the family business to killing people seems very strong. And then, of course, sparing the weatherman is another questionable move. So she's full of those. She's full of those. She's an interesting kind of waffle character here.
Yeah, and by design,
Mhm.
I think,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I buy the motivation once Lan is killed. I just feel like Lan, he represents this this person who is keeping everything together in the family, in the city, between the clans, because he is this level-headed figure who takes his role very seriously and is doing just everything he can to prevent all-out war. And it ranges back to his days trying to keep the peace between Hilo and Shay.
Mhm.
And in it makes him, in retrospect, a character built to die, to build conflict. Like,
Mhm.
he is the perfect character to kill off, because as soon as he is killed off, it makes sense that Shay and Hilo would be like at conflict with each other and have to find a way to resolve things. But you kick off this conflict where it's it's gotten rid of the political person who's keeping this all together, and
Mhm.
it's also gotten rid of just the personality in the family that's keeping everyone at bay. And I think that everyone loves so much that they're gonna want to take vengeance like that. So I actually I buy Shay as turning that far in a moment of I guess grief and loss,
Mhm.
because she immediately does regret. She's like, that felt like a dream. She's not acting
Right.
like herself in that moment. And
Mhm.
I think even though she wasn't in the clan, she was. I
Yeah.
think that I it reached a point where her decisions to not be a part of the clan and not engage in certain behaviors were almost more of a statement to like show how she's not defined by the clan,
Mhm.
rather than in itself being about like, oh, I want this job, oh, I want to live here.
Oh, for
It's
sure.
like, oh, I want to show them that I'm okay living on my own, I'm okay taking a job that has nothing to do with them.
Right.
It's like, and when you're still defining your actions by being not a part of a group rather
Right.
than just independently because they're the actions you want to take, your head is 100% still in the clan. So I'm
Right.
like,
Yeah. No, you're
she's
picking up
just as
on
much
that.
in the clan.
Yeah, that's a very
Yeah, just as
subtle
much in the clan
distinction
as
that
anyone
Fonda
else.
Lee made that character like really strong because she understood that subtlety of like, yeah, she's not doing this because she really wanted to work like in the business world. She really wanted a corporate job. No, she wanted to stick it to
Mhm.
her family. And one of the big themes in this book is family and how that kind of gets wrapped into this crime syndicate too, and how they're hopelessly interlaced. And like Shay's arc of trying to find her own identity and ultimately like embracing the family, it mirrors Andon's storyline well too, because he's someone who's kind of defined by his family as well. And this whole idea of like, can I get out of this? Is this something I want to be in? Like, do we have choices? Like, can we still be a loving family and not take part in this violent crime? Like, it's an interesting question asked to two very different characters, and they almost kind of end up in opposite spots at the end in a lot of ways.
Mm.
What I like about Andon is, he was adopted into the family, so there's an interesting layer of family dynamic there where. Hilo treats him like a brother, of course, and Lon always says, "Oh, you're like my brother." But there's the age difference, and Andon never I think took him a while to fully accept that he was part of the family sometimes too. So there's and like his friends don't know quite how to treat him and everything like that. So that is a great addition to his character. And then his mother, who is a very powerful green bone user, I think like she was able to use Jade in a very specific
Yeah.
way, like really well.
Yeah.
And Andon's very accomplished with Jade as well too, but she died from the itches, and that's kind of scarred him too. So he's got these ghosts hanging over him, and like that, like the way he separates from the clan is very interesting and almost in direct opposition to Shay, who's gets pulled back in. So yeah, and then also you got to remember Andon was delivering the shine to Lon, and he knows Lon overdosed on shine. He's one of the few people that know the truth. So now he's anti-shine, like anti all these things, and the fact that he walks away is such a powerful moment that I loved too. So it's an interesting look at like, can you break away from your family? Like, is that even possible? Like, even when we are on our own, we're still defined by our families in a lot of ways. And I think that question is presented in two really interesting ways between Shay and Andon.
Well said, Charles. And I think it's such phenomenal writing from Fonda Lee to build in these themes of family and duty and just what all of this means in society, from what Jade means in society to what it means to be loyal to your clan in this society, to like how much honor there is in graduating first in your class and all at the academy. It's like all of this stuff where it makes that moment you're talking about, where at the actual graduation we get Andon declaring in front of everyone that he doesn't want Jade and he doesn't want any part of this. It's like, I don't know. I that moment, it was such a payoff for me, and it made me realize how good a job Fonda Lee did with this, because I was like cringing. I was like, oh no, like not in front of everyone like that.
Yeah.
Like this is gonna be such bad looks, and Hilo's gonna be so pissed. And it's like the fact that a moment can kind of like strike you that hard, it can make you come to see, oh wow, she did a great job of defining this culture, this society, this family.
Yeah, and there's great
Props to
dialogue
her for
between
that.
Hilo and Andon at the end after Andon walks away from receiving the honorific, like, first in class stone of Jade. And it's exactly right, because Hilo loved Andon like a brother, and you see that, like, he's been training him up, building him up, like, showing him that support throughout the whole thing. And then for Andon to just walk away is, to Hilo, the most hurtful thing you can do. There's nothing more hurtful to Hilo than to kind of go against the family, right? Because those interpersonal, intimate relationships matter more to Hilo than anything. You can beat the crap out of him, take away all of his money, whatever. Like, you can do anything to Hilo, and he's strong. He's a fighter. But the area where he's tender is his emotional relationships with his family. And if he feels like you kind of betrayed that relationship, it's the most damaging thing you could do to him. So now Hilo is in the wake of that, especially after they killed the mountain together. That was like, Hilo's like, oh, we're gonna do so many great things together, buddy, like you and me together, like there's no stopping what we can do. And then you have Andon, like, when I had that much Jade, it gave me a feeling of power that I know I just have to stay away from. He liked it too much. Like, when I literally exploded the mountain's brain with pure, like, Jade energy, it felt way too good. And he makes a fantastic case. Like, that is kind of an alarming attitude to have, and it's one that this society tries to build up and support, but it's one that, you know, you can't build a family relationship out of, and you can't survive as an individual with that. And like, look at what happened to Lon, look what happened to Andon's parents. It's something that he's perpetually afraid of. He's like, I don't want to be a killer, I don't want to be a weapon. And Hilo's like, I thought we were being brothers in arms, man. Brothers in arms. Like, we're in war. How could you disrespect me like this? It's such a great argument where it just sucks for everybody. No one's wrong. And I'm excited to see where that goes in the trilogy, you know? It's like, how does that relationship continue?
It's such an earned moment, like you're saying, Charles, because of what he saw happen to Lon and what happened to his mom. And you just buy it so much. And sometimes those surprise moments at the end of books, they feel forced, and they feel like they're the kind of things to set up conflict in the next book, keep you reading. But you're like, this is weird. Why would this character refuse Jade? This is all this character has ever wanted, is to graduate first in their class and play a big role in the clan. And it's like, oh, wow. On top of what he experienced with Lon and what he experienced with his mom, then he experiences what it's really like to have all of that Jade, and he sees shades of the issues that probably got his mom into trouble showing up in him, and he's like, this life is just not for me. And it's a beautiful moment, and the way Hilo reacts to it is expected, but no one's wrong. I agree with you there, Charles.
That's what makes a good conflict.
For sure.
There's so many systematic issues with being a crime family, with having unchecked power that also has really severe withdrawal symptoms. It's like there's really systematic issues with that, and it's when you layer in this idea of honor and Aisho and like doing right by the family, it builds all this extra pressure, and it mixes really violently. The result, as we've seen, is explosive, and Andon is so trying to cling on to any kind of idea of identity, and like he just wants to see any other fate for himself other than killing until he kills himself, kind of a thing from the Itches. And he's like, there's got to be a better life for me somewhere, but everything he has is tied into his family, his adopted family. So like, what can he do? And like Hilo is like, I need you, like we did some really great stuff just now, and we can continue to be great, and like I'm losing this war left and right, like we are totally outclassed in every way, and I need you, or I'm going to die, and you walking away is going to potentially cause me to lose this war and die myself, and your whole family will die. And like, is this what you want? And that's a tough thing that Andon is left with to think over. And now, of course, like you said, Dylan, he rebuked the Jade in front of everyone, so that's going to have a ripple effect that like is going to be really all the gossip wheels are going to be turning after that for sure, just because of how public that was. So it's a really messy situation, and the idea of identity is kind of self is getting lost in this family war that's just so destructive right now. And I think you have different people you have Hilo, who's trying to keep the family together, and you have Andon, who's trying to avoid this violent end that he sees as inevitable, and they're both noble pursuits. It's just, it puts them at odds, really. And that's what makes that ending moment so terrific, and what brings this whole story kind of to an end. You're left with this idea of like, no one's really winning right now. This war's kind of hit this turning point now that the Horn is dead from the Mountain Clan, but it's still a long battle ahead, and now the family is kind of been in the scandal. And caused a scandal. So it's like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and I think there are two moments, one with Shay and one with Lon, where they go to see Andon at the academy, and the result of their interactions is like, hey, I just want to make sure you're doing this because you want to do this. You do have options here. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was kind of odd when I was first reading it, because I was like, didn't we do this interaction already? Like, I think by the time Shay's doing it, it's like Lon did it way before, and they have the same kind of interaction with Andon. And I'm now thinking back, and I'm like, wow, that was that was really good, because I think they had the two characters besides Hilo be like, hey, you're good, like we respect it if you leave, and then it's Hilo who's in charge by the time he leaves, and Hilo, all he really did was show up and beat the crap out of it.
right.
In a nice way.
And now Lon is dead.
In a brotherly way. And
Shay's kind of converted back. And I do like the interactions.
But she's not, she still feels that way about Andon. She's still trying to, yeah, I mean, she's telling Hilo at the end, he's like, you guys should talk. Like, there's no reason why you two should be at such odds. He's basically our brother, and he is not up for that. So we'll have to see what happens in future books. But
I was always fascinated by the conversations between Shay and Andon, because in a lot of ways it feels like there's always like this missed connection, missed opportunity between them. Like they couldn't really connect. I know like Andon wanted to kind of confess all this like shine delivery stuff he was doing with Lon right before Lon died. And Shay was like, "Oh, I'm so excited to have my new job." And he's like, "Oh, congratulations." And they both felt like this moment was kind of missed between them. To me, that's kind of an interesting dynamic that Shay like is saying all these things, but she hasn't really had the opportunity to connect with Andon in any like interpersonal meaningful way. It just kind of feels like they're very polite towards each other and haven't quite gotten in sync yet. And it's ultimately what led Andon to keep Lon's secret. Like Andon was about to confess the whole shine thing, and would that have made a difference? Maybe. It could have helped prevent Lon from overdosing or being on his own or something. But he keeps the secret, and he feels kind of guilt for that. But it's also in part from Shay like not fully listening and being present with her conversations with Andon. I don't know. There's something there for me that I find interesting when those two get together. They're kind of opposite but similar in a lot of ways, and that's caused them to really have a hard time connecting like Andon's done with Hilo. I just think Hilo loves everybody in the family like a puppy and is trying to bring them all together, whereas Shay's been trying to keep her distance for so long that they really don't have anything in common.
Yeah, I like what you bring up about how they're opposites in some way, but similar in others. It's like they're opposites in the sense that Andon felt a little bit on the outside, and his whole life was focused on how do I really get myself entrenched on the inside here. And Shay is the opposite in the sense that she was born right on the inside. She's one of the main family members, and she was always trying to see how can I get myself out more toward the periphery here where I can maintain relationships with the people in my family, but not be a call in the true sense of it, in terms of being part of the capital F family. And I feel like it goes to show such great character arcs where by the end, the one who always wanted to be on the inside and was striving from the outside had the opportunity to be right there and turns it away. And meanwhile, Shay, the one who's been trying to get out to the periphery, ends up fully entrenched as the weatherman. And I think this was Brand Sanderson, but it could be anyone, I'm not positive, who said, like, it's really great character writing when you know exactly what a character wants, and they're striving for that the whole book. But then in the end, they get what they need. And it's different from what it was that they wanted. And I think you kind of get that with both of those characters. And then what he really needed was to get away. This life of violence was never going to actually work out well for him. And then with Shay, what she really needed was to be a central part of this family. It's what she's good at. It's really what she knows and who she is deep down, and it was time to stop denying it and just commit to that life fully, I think. So
that's interesting.
In the end, they both get what they need, but not what they wanted the whole time.
Very true. Yeah, no, I'm as the story progresses, I'm very interested in those two characters because they overlap in so many ways. But yeah, I mean, so many powerful moments here. I feel like in the spirit of being all-encompassing here, I want to air my one really minor criticism of the story, and let's not let's not get confused here. This is a great book, and it was highly entertaining, incredibly well plotted, and fantastic magic system and world and characters. But for me, and I was kind of talking to you about this off the air a little, Dylan. There was this one thing that keeps happening in the book, and this is more of not aligning to my taste than being actually not good. But there'd be dialogue. For example, you would have, let's say, Shay talking to Hilo, and then they're in the middle of a conversation, and then all of a sudden the narrative gives this whole backstory of like, oh, it's like Shay's like, hey brother, it's been a long time. It's like, it's been a long time since Shay left for the other country with her boyfriend, and then they had a whole life, and Hilo never forgave him, and even when they tried to keep in touch, Hilo was always avoiding her, and she's feared this moment her whole time, and then Hilo would go, it's okay to see you too, like, whatever. And then you're like, wait, what? Like, were we having a conversation? I kind of lost track. And that happened quite a bit in this story, where in the middle of dialogue, you have this, like, full context in while the dialogue is happening. And I think for me, it's just a simple editing thing of, like, you have these great characters, you've written this great dialogue, let's let it play out. We can understand the relationship between Shay and Hilo just by what they're saying. We don't need the context of, oh, Shay left and that broke Hilo's heart and they've had a hard time reconciling. It's like, we know that from what they're saying and what they're doing in these moments. And in these cases, the showing is much more strong than the telling. So, and that happened a lot in this book, where almost every conversation was I'm going to say interrupted, but really like interlaced with the full context history of what happened between them. And it's like, I don't know if I need the context while the scene is happening. You know, that to me was kind of disruptive. And, you know, like the stories I like is like almost like TV scenes, kind of where there's dialogue and action happening, and that propels the background and the context of the story. That's just my preferred way. I know a lot of fantasy isn't written like that, so I'm not saying that this is a con, but for me it was distracting a lot when I'm like, oh great, more context. I think this could have been a really strong like 400 350 page book with all that context stripped away and let the conversations kind of play out. But that's just me, that's just my personal taste. And I felt like that had to be said, because as much as I love this book, I found myself being like, context again? Okay, like I could have guessed a lot of this because your scene is so well set up, and like I don't need the full context. I don't know. I don't know if you felt the same way, Dylan, but that was just something I ran into and was like sharing with you as we were going. I didn't want to omit that from the episode.
Right. Yeah, it's something that you brought up to me, and once you brought it up to me, I started noticing it everywhere. You know, one of those things. It's like the FedEx sign, or
the arrow.
You know,
you can't unsee it. Cannot unsee.
And there's exactly someone points out to you that there's that arrow formed. You know, if this might be your moment, listener, where you're learning about the arrow in the FedEx sign. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. But for some reason, before you saw it, it was invisible to you. And that's exactly what was happening for me with these exposition dumps that would happen in the middle of the dialogue. But once, I agree. And it made it kind of jarring, much more jarring once you brought it up. But
I didn't mean to ruin it for you.
No, and that's the thing. It far from ruins the book,
right.
And
far
it is. I think what I'm hearing too, though, when you're discussing it, and I agree with this, it's Fonda Lee's dialogue and her character writing. It is so strong that this exposition is not needed.
Right.
We can see in the interactions that these kind of, I guess, conflicts are at play, and we can read into it, and there's this trust in the reader that I think Fonda Lee could provide in those moments, and trust in herself and her own writing, because it is all there. That we know how important, in that example you're giving there, Charles, the Hilo and Shay interaction, we know how important family and duty are to this clan. We know what Shay did and that she's just coming back, and we know Hilo pretty well as a character. We can read in between these lines because it's there. The character writing is there. So I think it's the kind of thing that this is, I think, her second book. I think
Yeah,
she wrote a
she wrote
sci-fi book
sci-fi
before
before.
this.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I do believe it's her second published book.
I think
And I hear such amazing things about the sequels and the series as a whole. It's
right.
such a minor foible
So
that we're
minor.
pointing out
Yeah,
just because the book is so strong, and
yeah,
you feel like you got to point out the one thing that
yeah.
was disruptive in your reading
Mm-hmm.
process. And it's something that is so easy to
Yeah, just edit it out.
to work out, right? You
Right,
can
right.
edit out. You can in future books you can say, okay, I'm just not going to include that bit, or I'm going to move it somewhere where it's not in the middle of a conversation
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. So it's, if you're reading a book and you're like, these concepts this person's getting into, it's just like not interesting, or the dialogue in this book is just not good, it doesn't sound real, or these
Right.
characters feel flimsy or one-dimensional, those kind of criticisms, that's something you're like, I don't know if this author is
Can
for
come
me,
back
and I
from
don't
that.
know if I'm
Yeah.
ever going to enjoy stuff by this. When the critique is like, oh, this stuff could probably be cut, this stuff could probably be moved, the character writing is good enough where we don't need this explained to us
Right.
explicitly. Like, that is part of, I think, high praise for a book that is
Oh yeah.
extremely strong and has all the elements. And
And that's the thing.
I have a
All of
lot of
the
faith that Jade
challenging
War will be
parts
even
of
better.
writing a fantasy novel are so brilliantly executed here. Like, I can't say enough about the way the magic system was built into the political and like
Mm-hmm.
economical and like tension, and it's also built into the family tension, which is built into the
Mm-hmm.
characters. It's like when you have something that rich and multi-layered, and then you have this whole cast of characters around it, you hardly need to explain anything. You did all the heavy lifting just in building this world. And I think so many, like, that's such a rare thing. I think that's what makes good fantasy books truly best in class, is that they're able to pull that off in such an honest way, where all of a sudden the machine, it becomes a machine that starts turning and just moves the whole story, just like lifts the whole story on its own without this explanation. And it kind of reminds me of, like, in the very beginning you have Lon talking to, you know, Call Sen, and it's basically like Call Sen is being super rude to Lon, and Lon's trying to be like, excuse me, Call Sen, can I please hire a new weatherman? He's like, no, I hate you. And then it cuts back to Lon's wife recently left him for another man, causing him to lose faith in Keikon and affecting his abilities. Despite this, he's still a strong leader for the clan. It's like, okay, whatever you say, Don, and then leaves. I'm like, what? Like, did we need all that explanation? Like, he could have just made a conversation. It's like, I hate you as much as your wife does, and you'd be like, oh, it's kind of mysterious. Like, obviously, Fonda Lee would write something much better and more subtle than that. But it's like, that would speak more than giving me the full explanation. I just felt like that was happening so much, and I was like, you did all the heavy lifting of creating this beautiful, like, ecosystem. And some writers describe the process as like, once the characters come to life or something, they just go. And I feel like this world is just going, and it's super fascinating. Obviously, she's like, these big plot moments are paying off in so many spectacular ways that you can tell she's been building towards all of these things. And that, again, being able to set up and pay off is such an art, and it's masterfully done here. So all of these things that are really hard to accomplish as an author, Fonda Lee just knocked out of the park. So, and I think that's why a lot of people say, having only read Jade City and hearing a lot of people that recommend it be like, you have to read the whole trilogy. I think that makes a lot of sense to me as well, because I can only see just the conflict is just beginning, and like her setup and her build up is only just getting started, and I feel like she's got a lot of that out of the way now. And I can see the second and third books really picking up traction and really picking up steam as we go through the story. So the fact that people don't just recommend a book, they're like, you have to read the whole series, I feel like that's kind of unique. Like, obviously fans want you to read the whole series, but it's a lot of fans explicitly say, read the whole series, it's excellent, which I feel like is a really unique thing to Jade City recommendations that we've gotten compared to recommendations for other authors or books. I don't know if you felt the same way, Dylan.
Oh, for sure. It's something, I think, I think back to something like The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, a fantastic book, part of even a series that won Hugo Awards for every single book in the series. And that being said, I've read the whole series there. It's all phenomenal, all deserved, of course. But that's a book when we were talking about, oh, we're going to read the Fifth Season for the podcast. Everyone's just like, oh, great. Excited. I'm glad. It's a great book.
Yeah.
And that's a book that won Hugos for every single book in the series. And even that series, you hardly get any responses. They're like, oh, okay, but you gotta read the next 2 books right away, too.
Right.
And it's like, okay. Like, when you post Jade City, I would say you're just, or on our account, we're bound to get multiple people on every post like that. That's like, okay, you have to read all 3 of them, though. So it's very interesting. I think we've yet to see, because we haven't read the next 2 books, exactly what's going on there. I think the implications of some of the things she's set up are just begging to be explored. I just think even some of the stuff like Stone Eyes and the implications of being able to carry Jade and not have it serve that dangerous purpose in it, even if you can't use it, and there's things like that. We've only scratched
and then
the
when
surface
going to the other government and making that side deal for Jade, like that's all just kicking off. It's a whole nother world, a whole other continent of people. Like, yeah, it's just getting started in so many ways.
Yeah, it's only scratched the surface.
I have full confidence in Fonda Lee's plotting too. I know that the best is yet to come. I've seen it in this story here, and it's like there's so much going on here, and there's so much subtleties in, like I said, the relationships, the political factions, the economics. Like, there's so much going on in all of that still has to be explored and resolved, that I can see why people are like, you can't just like put book 1 down and judge the series. Like, it's a greater work for sure, and it's only getting started.
It is only getting started, Charles. But we, on the other hand, I think we're only getting finished over here. We've
I think that is well said.
Whoa, is that the listeners can't hear, but that intro music just played a little bit in the background. So maybe we're only getting started. Round 2.
We are not only getting started. I think we've talked a lot about it. I will also say, it was funny, I was listening to the audiobook and I was like, I bet this is the same guy that did the Sword of Kaigen. I was like, I bet it's the same guy, and I looked it up. They have the same first name but different last names, and that confused me so much. I was like, wait, is this still the same person? Like, it's 2022, almost 2023. Maybe they changed their name. Like, it happens, and I'm still not sure because they sound so similar. And they're both named Andrew.
You didn't work that out before.
I was like, I am not fully convinced they're not the same person, but I think they are 2 different people. But it was just one of those funny things because the stories are kind of similar, like it's like a more modern setting, and then like there's obviously like a lot of cultural elements weaved in from like Asian cultures that is really fascinating, and so I was like, oh, and then they bring in the same like audiobook narrator. Interesting. And I was like, oh no, they're different. They just have the same first name. Super bizarre. But there you go.
That is funny.
It is what it is. It confused me greatly, but no, all good.
Yeah, they are both Andrews.
Yeah, they're both Andrews, but apparently they're different. And I think the one that did Jade City voiced a lot of like clone troopers in Star Wars, which is super interesting. He's got a lot of like animated Star Wars cast roles there, which I'm a fan of. So yeah, I mean, he's silky
You're
smooth.
Such a big
voice,
fan that you have another podcast, Roger, a Star Wars podcast based on the Star Wars franchise.
That's
the release schedule
true.
slowed down a little bit lately.
We're on a hiatus, but it happens to the best of us. There's still plenty of back library stuff to watch and enjoy in that show for sure. But more important than that
to.
is that, you guys check out Fonda Lee's works. And, if you like Jade City, it's Jade War is the next one, I believe. And, it's...
Then Jade Legacy.
I'm super impressed by Fonda Lee. This is my first experience reading anything from Fonda Lee. And it was also, there was this back and forth that it was maybe going to be a TV show for Peacock, and then apparently that fell through.
About that.
Which I'm mixed feelings, because on one hand I would love to see this adapted to television, but on the other hand it's like, we can do better than Peacock, let's be real here. So I'm kind of I'm kind of excited.
I wonder what Fonda thinks of that.
I'm sure Fonda's disappointed,
like,
but
I can do better than Peacock, screw these.
No,
I'm sure
it's like, let's get more eyeballs on this, let's think a little bigger than Peacock, we can do this. There's opportunity in this deal falling through.
Get HBO, get them on the horn.
Oh,
nailed it!
Oh, nice, good.
Once the puns start coming out, it's
unraveling.
Episode too long.
I don't think we're gonna do any better than that pun, though. So, I think we just gotta play that sweet outro music.
It is a pillar of our show.
Oh, man. If we were in person, you'd be getting the fist right now.
Nailed it. I was trying to think of a way to work in that I'm a part of the Mountain Clan when you were talking about how when I went to Colorado, it was like, you were like, oh, now that you're in Colorado and not part of the part of Long Island anymore. Because I was like, well, I defected to join the Mountain Clan. But, things were moving so fast. Coffee hadn't even really kicked in. I'm just starving over here.
Well, please allow me to use one of my discipline of deflection to get away from our poor puns and just get to the outro here. Please tell me I can play that sweet outro music.
Get that sweet outro music. Channeling? Yeah. That's the best I can do. Pumping. Just get it pumping.
I'll get it pumping. Here we go.
Let's move forward here.
All right. Thank you all so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, go ahead and follow us on social media. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram, and the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end for Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like the show and they like what they heard today and they want to support us even more than following us on the socials, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, and you can do that now on Spotify. You can do it on Apple Podcasts. It's just 2 clicks over there on Spotify and helps us so much. Apple, you can even leave a review to tell us hopefully what you're enjoying about this show, and it means a lot to us anytime we see ratings or reviews, and it helps us out so much. Trust us. No matter how many reviews we get, we have never grown jaded. So,
oh no! Stop right now! Stop the show! Stop! Thank you all so much for listening, and as always, go forth and conquer, friends.